3, 2, 1, and we are live. Hey guys, welcome back to the Strong.Sistas YouTube channel. In this live, we're going to talk a little bit about the startup costs for a regenerative farm, kind of talk a little bit about our Make Soil Sexy Again campaign, what our goals are with our farm, and then we'll end with a little Q&A. Yeah. Okay. So first, we're going to go over, so you guys know,
attendance today.
there's 3 people here. It's coming. It'll be bopping. So you guys know that we recently bought a 26 acres total, but the actual acres, so Angel Acres is about 22 acres. And we're going to review some of like the year 1 essential costs that are applicable for our farm. And they will probably differ based on your farm, like the type of soil, the type of fields that you acquire, the number of acres. And so we're going to go over year 1 essentials and then like year 2 ideal costs coming in.
Are these costs for like somebody who wants to start their own farm?
Yes.
Consider? Okay.
Yes.
So hopefully this is helpful to you guys.
There's Cowboy Kyle.
We have Kyle himself here.
Yeah, if you guys have any specific questions, hit them in the chat and we will get to them. We will get to them in a little bit. So, okay. So the year 1 essentials, obviously land, and we have that taken care of. However, if you are looking for a regenerative farm, I think looking into leasing land would be a more cost-effective solution. We found that it was a lot harder to find good land to lease.
We actually have a video about finding land.
Yes, on YouTube
after this.
Yes, and that was a challenge for us. We weren't really able to find anything. And another problem there is that like you could be improving the soil and then all of a sudden the landowner could,
if you're leasing,
they could end the contract, and so then you'd have to start over at a new pasture. So that's always something to consider. However, you can get into this a lot more cost effectively. So there's land, and then ideally you put in fencing, and so that's going to be 2 different levels. You have the perimeter fencing, and so that's going to be we are going to be using like a field fence because of the specific animals that we're getting, and that's going to require like T-posts and wooden posts. So that's the perimeter fence, and that's just to keep all the animals contained. And then you have the inside, you divide all of those fields into paddocks, and you have the like temporary fencing, and those are ideally like solar powered. So you have your solar powered energizer to make those temporary fences hot. So you have the outer perimeter and then the inside temporary fencing, and you need that to be able to rotate your animals around.
So that costs will largely depend on how much land you have?
Yes. Obviously, the more acres you have, the more it will cost.
Do you have a rough estimate of how much it will cost?
It's probably going to be around $7,000 to $10,000, something like that.
Great.
For fencing for about a 22-acre piece of property. And then seeding and fertilizer. So this will depend on the type of field that you acquire. So if you are like us and you get a conventional row crop field, that's what we acquired. So our fields have been used for conventional corn and soy crop rotation for years. And so the soil health is really poor. And someone explained this to us in a really good way. So it's like our field is like a drug addict, and it's been using fertilizer to be able to grow crops for the last, 10 plus years. And so you can't just like pull a drug addict off of the drugs. You have to wean them off slowly. So next year we will have to seed and then fertilize the property to be able to get growth, so that way we can get grass to grow for our animals to eat. So seeding and fertilizer,
that would depend on what kind of land you acquire.
Yes, and we are going to be using our soil test results that we should be getting here soon to be able to pick a diverse cover crop mix for what seeds we're going to be planting. And then we'll also be deciding which fertilizer, whether we go full organic or if we use similar to what the previous farmer that used these fields did. And ideally, you would wean off of those seeding and fertilizer year 2 or year 3. And so we're going to be starting with annual seeds, and then we'll get into more perennial seeds. And then hopefully a few years down the line, we won't have to do any seeding and fertilizing. So that's the idea. Like a drug addict, you slowly wean off of it as your soil health improves. Sarah's going to hit the kitchen
If you need me, I'm back.
Yeah. Okay. So then after the seeding and fertilizer, obviously once you have your fencing and then you have like grass and food for the animals to consume, purchasing livestock And obviously, again, the type and amount will depend on your land and your number of acres. So since we only have 22 acres, we are deciding to go with lamb instead of cows because lamb are smaller ruminants, so they won't have as big of an impact on the ground. And in order for you to improve soil health with animal integration, you have to make sure that you are implementing proper recovery. And so we will be rotating our sheep throughout in the different paddocks. And so we received advice from, for example, Will Harris and Cowboy Kyle and Dr. Jason Roundtree at Michigan State University that we should probably start with sheep as opposed to lamb lamb instead of cows because of the size of our field. We're also going to be doing chickens because chickens are really good, a really strong asset to have in your fields because their manure is like a natural fertilizer and that will help us grow back the grass faster. So we're going to go with sheep and chickens. And then for your sheep, you will need a livestock guardian dog. And so that's another purchase.
I have a question.
Yes, Sarah has a question.
What animals would be like the most cost efficient to start with versus the most expensive?
The most cost efficient to start with, I would definitely say like chicken, like broilers, because you can get your quickest return on your investment because it only takes 6 to 8 weeks for them to reach slaughter weight.
What does Kyle think?
We'll get back to that. We'll get back to
Where do
that.
you go?
I can join.
Oh yeah. What do you think is the most cost effective animal?
Most cost effective?
Yeah.
To raise?
To start with.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be
They always say chickens are the gateway drug.
chickens are the gateway drug. We are also interested in adding that lamb because of the impact and improvement that ruminants can have on the soil health. But like I said, chickens are going to be the most cost effective. So that's what we're going to add those to. So in addition to obviously having your livestock need to consume water. So you will need a water source out in the field. And it's very common these days for a lot of these conventional row crop fields to not have a water source out in the middle. So we'll have to tap into the well and get a water source out into the fields. And then obviously feed. So chickens will require feed and the cost will go up the more like premier you get their feed. So non-GMO will be more expensive. And then obviously organic will be the most expensive. And then for us up north, we require a lot of hay. So for example, Cowboy Kyle at Apsey Farms, they have to have hay for 6 months out of the year. Is that right?
Yeah, I understand. But we're 2 weeks farther north. So.
Yeah, that's true. So hay will be required, especially if you're in a colder climate, and hay is rather expensive. So we will need hay for the lambs during the winter months. Okay, moving on to the next item would be infrastructure. So most importantly, a mobile chicken pen. So we are probably going to be doing more of like the prairie schooner model. It's basically like a large greenhouse that you can move throughout your pasture. So you can take a tractor and move that. Other options are like the Joel Salatin model for broilers, so for meat birds. So we'll need some sort of mobile chicken pen. And then we will need like at least a 3-sided structure for the lamb to have during the colder winter months so that they have some sort of structure to block like really cold winds or rain or like hail, things like that. And then the lamb manager at White Oak Pastures also suggested getting a herding pen because lamb sometimes get parasites. And so it's important to like bring your lamb into the herding pen so that way you can properly check them for parasites in their hooves or in their eyeballs. And then last but not least, soil tests. I think that it's always important to incorporate soil tests into like your starting and then after a year. So we're going to be hopefully taking soil tests either. What do you do? Do you do bi-yearly or just one time a year?
I can join. So
okay,
I mean,
Cowboy Kyle's joining.
Every year. So
What?
I join. So best practice is soil tests every year. But,
Okay.
I mean, you really want to do a soil test every 3 to 4 years in every field because you don't always see a difference year over year.
Okay.
So,
But so is that for organic matter or is that for like soil biology?
both. So organic matter is going to be a very lagging indicator, and it can take.
Okay.
You can still improve your organic matter in 1 year, but
Yeah.
it's really multiple years before you.
So
really notice a big
for
difference.
someone who's just starting, it would be beneficial to do right when you start, maybe year 1, but definitely year 2. And then maybe just one time a year. And then as your field gets more and more, healthier, then you'll be able to see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure. And it doesn't hurt to do it every year by any means.
Yeah.
But you're not going to notice a big impact year over year as you would from year 1 through year 3 and 4.
Yeah.
You're about seeding?
Soil tests.
Soil tests.
Soil tests. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that's like, I would say, did I miss any like year 1 essentials? Because ultimately, if you get meat birds, you have to take them to the processor after like 6 to 8 weeks. And so ideally you have like a trailer or like a truck to be able to take them to the processor. But I don't know if we're going to be doing meat birds. And so we just have egg layers and lamb, and we won't be taking them to the processor year 1. So we're holding off that cost of doing the animal trailer and the truck for year 2, right? Okay.
That makes sense.
Do you think I covered everything?
Yeah, you talked about water lines.
Yep. Yeah.
Water source. That's always key. So the biggest thing when you're going to have livestock that I say you got to worry about, first, fencing, keep all the animals in, and you don't want them to get out.
Yeah.
Perimeter fencing is the recommended by far because the high tensile anyway, because it can do a lot of different livestock.
Yeah.
And then the water lines. And if you can get the fencing and water lines, that's your foundation.
Yeah.
And then it's getting it seeded and ready to go.
And unfortunately, there are grants to apply to, but unfortunately, a lot of them are, you already have to be in operation for a year. You already have to have livestock on your property. And so Sarah and I are applying to as many grants as we can that we are eligible to as complete new farmers coming into this like from scratch. So hopefully those come through. But okay.
It's really hard. It's really hard as a new farmer.
Yeah.
And like I said in the Q&A, like I'm really blessed and fortunate that my family has had this in the family for 4 generations now.
Yeah.
And it's a huge undertaking. And that's the biggest hurdle for a new farmer getting started is
the land.
Figuring out the land. And a lot of times it's much better to rent versus try to own.
Yeah.
And then once you do have the land, then you got to make sure it's properly fenced and you have the water access.
Yeah.
And those are some of the most capital intensive startup costs.
Okay. So year 1. And then another like very strong specific cost for potentially year 1 would be like upgrading our video equipment so that we could actually take videos out in the field and not have like wind noise and have better high quality videos and be able to pay someone to be able to make better videos because we're still here in iMovie editing like Spanish class style videos. Okay.
Spanish class.
Nobody knows what that means.
So for year 2, we would then hopefully have enough funds to be able to buy, like I said, a livestock trailer and a truck with a hitch to be able to transport those animals to the processor. And I guess you could ultimately rent those from someone in your area because you're not going to be taking animals to the processor too often. But that would be one upgrade in year 2. And then obviously processing fees. Those are really expensive, but I guess you could do more like the whole and half model, sell like whole or half cows and get those processing costs paid for by the customer. That's what you guys do for like your wholes and quarters.
Yeah,
right?
it's wholes or quarters that they would pay for processing versus for it.
And then another huge cost for year 2 would then be like your walk-in freezer and your like distribution center so that you could actually properly store your products so that they stay frozen and then pack and then ship them out to you all or to customers. So I think that those kind of, did I miss any? Like these are like bare bone minimal costs. Obviously there's always ways to like upgrade and get fancy with it, but do you think I missed any?
I don't think so. I mean, I found with every project, everything costs twice as much and takes twice as long as you anticipate.
Yep.
It's just kind of the general rule of thumb, especially the farming. So yeah. I really commend you for doing this. I'm excited to see how it progresses.
We'll see. Okay. So let's go through the questions for the starting costs. There's not that many. Yeah. So what is a T-post versus a wooden post?
You want to take that?
Sure.
You know what this one?
So T-posts, so you're going to need, like, you can't just have a fence with no posts to be able to support the fence. You have to have like a straight rod support every X feet, and it depends on what type of fence you use in between. So you can just do high tensile wires, or you can get a field fence, which is like what you would typically see a fence, like it's just like squares everywhere, right? And so a T-post is used like along the straight lines of your field. It's a more cost-effective solution, but it's not as sturdy as like a wooden post. So the T-posts are going to be used along the like perimeter, and then wooden posts are going to be used at your corners to provide more strength. What do you call it? An H?
An H brace is what you use for the corner post.
So you would make an H brace at each of your corners using wooden posts. And the wooden posts are obviously going to be more expensive. They're large diameter wooden posts, and they're a lot more sturdy. Okay.
And I will say, so your T-posts can be, they're likely not made out of wood. I don't know any T-posts out of wood.
Yeah.
The T-post would either be a metal T-post, or they make some fiberglass ones, which are really cool.
Yeah.
They call it the post is the insulator, so you don't even have to have insulators on those posts.
Yeah.
So there's like some new technology out there for your posts to check out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, someone said lambs get parasites, and yes, that's true. If you check out Greg Judy's channel, he talks about his flurd. So it's his lamb flock with his cow herd. And he recommends if you get a lamb flock to buy like 1 or 2 steers. And so that's something that we are interested in doing, is buying 1 or 2 steers, because those 2 animals have competing parasites. And so it helps reduce the parasite load for one of those animals. So we'll be getting a lamb flock, and then we'll be getting 1 or 2 steers to put in with that and have our own flurd. Yeah. Okay. That's all the questions. Well, all right. I was going to talk a little bit about like what our goal is with our farm, with Angel Acres. And I think that, okay, one more question. This is one I need Kyle for, because I don't know the answer to this. This is a good question.
It's a really good question.
What about insurance costs? Can you get insurance on the animals? That's something that I need to investigate. I do not know. Do you have to have insurance for the land? Because it's ultimately two businesses, more like 3, but you have your farm, and then you have your like direct to consumer marketing and distribution. Do you have to have insurance for both?
Great question. So the short answer is you probably need more insurance than you're anticipating right now.
Okay.
If you're direct marketing and selling direct to consumers, like Ash mentioned, and they want to do, you're essentially creating 2 businesses. You got the farm production aspect, which is everything that it takes to produce the animals on your land. Yeah. And you can get some insurance for like loss of livestock coverage. It's debatable. If you ask your accountant, they probably wouldn't say it's the best investment, but it helps give you that peace of mind. And I found recently, in the last few years, and it's only gotten worse, I do believe global warming is real. And I believe we've had so many more adverse weather conditions year over year. And it seems to only get more extreme. Yeah. And so we've had the last couple of years, these 1 or 2 freak weather accidents, as I'm sure has happened all across the United States, and you always hear stories about it. And because we raise all of our animals on pasture, we don't keep them in these really confinement, high security buildings for these adverse weather conditions. So it's inevitable you're going to lose some to Mother Nature. Yeah. And we've lost entire batches of chickens before, simply because you have these 60-mile-an-hour winds that come in. Yeah. But fortunately, we did have coverage, so we were able to recover some of the losses that we had in that case.
What company do you use for insurance?
It varies. Shout out to Farm Bureau.
Farm Bureau, okay.
And, but there's a lot of, so many different agencies will cover this. Yeah. But you have to think about, so you have a farm production, but then if you have employees, you also have to have liability coverage for your employees. True. And then talking about the direct consumer marketing and selling business, you need to have product liability coverage. Yeah. So that way, if you get sued for whatever reason, you have liability coverage to cover that. And that was, so insurance was one of the costs, and I'm really glad you asked that, Mike. It was a cost that I had failed to really account for when we started this. Yeah. And I didn't put that on my list. No, now I need to add it to my list. I'm not telling you about that. Because naively, you go into this and you look at how much money can you make off, because you see the how much it sells for grass-fed beef or lamb or whatever. You see how much it sells for at your Whole Foods or in your supermarket. And so naively, when I got into this, I just thought, like, that's how much we can make. Yeah. And I failed to take into account all the costs that it takes to produce food and meat the right way, without the antibiotics, without the vaccines, without the hormones, and raised on pasture. And it's a lot more expensive. There's a lot more that goes into that, even though the costs are more too. Yeah. So. And I think that's kind of important so like I wrote out all of these costs for year 1, and we won't be selling anything in year 1. Like, that's the sad thing. Well, you could have eggs in year 1. You could do eggs and chicken, I guess. Yeah, that's right. But like, for example, if you start with lamb or cows, depending on what age you buy them, it takes lamb a little bit longer than a year to reach maturity. And then cows, it takes almost over 2 years? 20 to 26 months for grass finished. Yeah. Obviously, the grain finished can be done faster. Yeah. Yeah, and there's other ways you can get around this, though. I would say if you're a starting farmer, I don't think you should start with a cow-calf operation or a sow operation. I think you should try to get the finishing done and try to find some partner farms that you trust, that you can buy some ideally 8-month-old calves.
Stocker calves,
yeah. And the same thing with lamb, too. If you can find some
that's true
that are already weaned, then you can finish them out in a much shorter time frame.
That's true.
But
so
it is a long time.
That's a good tip.
Potentially year 1, buy slightly older lamb, so that way we could finish them on our pasture and then maybe take them to the processor fall of 2021, maybe, and have product.
Yeah, and the hardest thing is finding other farm partners you can trust that have similar practices, similar genetics that you want. And then those are amazing partners to have, especially if they don't really want to do all the finishing work or the worry about selling the meat and all of that. They'd rather just raise and have the calves or the ewes every year.
Yeah.
Or the lambs every year.
Okay. Well, I think we're just going to kind of keep this live centered on like starting costs for regenerative farm, and we'll do a separate one kind of more about our Make Soil Sexy Again campaign and like what we want our farm to be, because I kind of went on a tangent on the costs. Do you have any more tips for a starting farmer on the most cost-effective way to get into regenerative farm?
Great question. The biggest, I think you guys are doing the right approach, and I know you're like really gung-ho and like really all about diving into things once you made up your mind. But you also spent at least 2 years visiting all these other farms.
That's true.
And talking with them. And Sarah and Ashley, I think, have visited more farms than any other person that I've known. I've talked to more farmers.
That's true.
Than anyone else that I've known. And I think that's the best thing you can do if you're interested in starting a farm and just any business, is to try and get experience from people that have done it before you and visit their farm. And we got to visit a partner farm, Fruits Family Farms, last Friday. And I always learn so much from every time I visit a new place, and always have a long list of questions to ask them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that's the best thing. And then there's so many good books out there. Joel Salatin is one of the thought leaders in the space, and he's got a lot of great books called You Can Farm or Your Successful Farm Business, I think is the other one.
Yeah.
Some other ones, Alan Nation from Stockman Grass Farmer. He's got a couple of really good books.
Yeah.
And there's a lot out there. So that's the biggest thing, is to try to do your due diligence and talk to other farmers to realize what's realistic, where do you want to go, and then like you guys are doing, try to make a budget for it, and then realize it's probably going to cost even more than what you anticipate,
and take 2 times as long,
and probably take twice as long.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we will certainly be documenting like all of the expenses that we are undertaking for our farm moving forward. There's not much we can do exactly at this moment because we are entering into the winter months. I was a little bit too excited and was trying to buy lamb for this winter, but he advised me to probably wait until spring. I don't want to like lose animals over the winter, and hay costs are really expensive. So we'll be starting like our perimeter fencing early next spring, as soon as the ground like thaws out. And then once we get fencing and doing our seeding and fertilizing, how long? So let's say, we have our conventional row crop field. If I seed and fertilize in like April, how long will it take to get sufficient grass to have food for the lambs to munch on and graze?
Good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you really want to give it some time for your grasses to establish and your forages to establish prior to letting your livestock in there to go after it. But I wouldn't anticipate more than really 3 months would be good, if you can give it 3 months at least rest and recovery.
Okay.
The longer, I mean, some people they'll plant it and they won't even touch the field that year to give depends on if you're doing annuals or perennials too.
I'm doing annuals because annuals, like they develop faster than perennials. They don't have as deep of root systems, but they come faster than perennials.
And you can easily graze those once they're, we always like to not turn any animals in our fields until it's at least 6 to 8 inches. And 8 inches is really like the minimum.
Yeah.
And if you can let the annuals grow up to that point, and then you can let your animals in there.
Yeah.
And then it's up to you after that first grazing of annuals, if you want to plant back into it.
Probably. I'll have to.
Yeah.
If I don't put any perennials in.
If you don't plant any perennials, so you're going to want to have at least 2 plantings next year. And then usually you'll switch it then over the following year to more of your perennials.
Okay.
It's like, what's what we like to do. We've always found it works better for us to do 2 years, at least 1 full year of annuals before we put a pasture back into our perennial ground.
Yeah.
And then once it's perennial, maybe we should talk about annuals for perennials so they know the difference.
Okay, enlighten us.
Annuals? Okay, so annuals, like the name suggests, it's an annual plant. So those won't naturally be reseeded and come up year over year.
Yeah.
Perennials can last anywhere from a couple of years to several years. I mean, there's some legumes and stuff that can be in there for 20 years or more in your fields. And those are your different grasses, your clovers, those kind of things.
Have a like deeper root system. And so those are going to help establish the healthiest soil, but they take longer to establish. Right?
They do.
And so if you had a conventional row crop field, it's probably not the best idea to just plant perennials year one, or else you'll just be kind of waiting a long time. And I want to get my grasses for the lambs to munch.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We have a few questions. So how many acres for each lamb? So I was advised for 22 acres to do about 30 lamb. Does that sound about right?
So like just almost one lamb per.
Yeah. And I'm going to be experimenting with doing like multi, like kind of high intensity grazing. So maybe rotating like 2 times a day, because I only have 22 acres and I need to be able to leave like sufficient recovery time. And so like Greg Judy, for example, he takes a third and leaves 2/3. So he lets his cows and lambs take a third of the grasses and then he rotates them, and they can do that rather quickly. And so sometimes he has to rotate his 2 times a day. And so I think it just, for your how many acres for each lamb, I think that will also depend on what type of rotational grazing strategy that you're going to adopt. I'd look into multi-adaptive paddock. What is it? And
multi-adaptive grazing. There's like 3 or 4 different terms for it. There's MIG, which is called stands for managed intensive grazing.
Yeah.
And there's a couple other names that throughout the years they've called them slightly different things.
Yeah.
But essentially it comes down to management. It comes down to moving letting your animals do the work and making your livestock move around to eat the food, as opposed to keeping them all in one building their entire life and bringing all the food to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this comes down to management.
Yep. Will you need additional shelters for the chickens or lambs? I don't think that, according to other farmers, I've asked a ton of farmers, like you said, I think the best thing you can do is just visit as many as you can. I think having that like greenhouse style, it's called like a prairie schooner type model. That's plenty of shelter. He is kind of north central Michigan, and they get pretty bad winters, and their chickens have been fine in that greenhouse structure.
For our laying chickens, we don't raise broilers 6 months out of the year.
Yeah.
They're pasture poultry. So we try to raise our broilers when we have pasture in full force.
Yeah.
And the other 6 months out of the year, we don't raise the broilers and we just focus on the egg layers.
Yeah. And so other than that for the chicken, and then for the lamb, I've heard that lamb are pretty resilient and they like to be out in the snow. But obviously with like freeze winds and freeze rain, you need to have that shelter for them. So there's these like 4-sided. So you got your sides, the back, and then a roof. And there's mobile options for those. So we'll be able to rotate those throughout the fields. Sarah has a question.
Can you talk about the costs like hay over the winter months?
Yeah.
So we have a question on hay production too.
Okay. Yes. More about hay production for winter. Do you guys have to use pesticide to protect the grass?
No. Ideally, no pesticides.
I think hay. So Will Harris calls it hay bombing. What do other people call it? Just hay grazing, something like that.
We call it bale grazing.
Bale grazing.
That's what we call it.
It's like one of the best things that you can do for your soil. And that's why I was interested in doing it this fall, because like that, putting a bunch of hay down on like row crop fields, that's a bunch of organic matter that the animals would then help push into the soil, and that organic matter will help improve the soil health. So hay is a good thing for the fields. So you don't need to protect it from the hay.
Yeah. Well, I think he's talking about more of the production of it. When you're producing it, do you have to use pesticides to protect it when you're doing hay? And I mean, we don't use pesticides at our farm. So I mean, some other farms can, depending on where you get your hay from. So it's nice to know what their practices are.
Yeah.
How much fertilizer are they using? Is it synthetic fertilizer or is it a natural fertilizer? And it's hard. And like Ash said, hay is our biggest cost every year. And so we can produce as much as we can, but we also buy a lot from other farms.
Yeah.
And it's twofold. One, it's necessary for the animals to get them through for those 6 months. We have to have hay.
Yeah.
But Ash said it's going to be an amazing tool for your pastures if you have the right mindset and philosophy of how to use the hay.
Yeah.
So if you can roll it out in your fields to feed them, like we call bale grazing or the hay bombs, excuse me.
Yeah.
Then the cows will, and you move it around every day, then the cows will eat the hay wherever you put it. And further, they'll also leave the manure and the nutrients wherever you want them.
Yeah.
And so this has been the best tool that we have used the last 3 years to really build the organic matter and the fertility in our fields, is using our biggest cost hay and treating that with the animals like it's the best compost, manure, fertilizer there is.
That's how you can control where they go. It's like their candy store.
Yeah. So in the winter months, you don't have to keep putting, so during the 6 months grazing period, we had these poly wire strings to
keep them contained.
Yeah. Portion off which field we want the cows to eat on every day. But in the winter months, you can use your hay as the same concept to move them around to all your different fields. And then they're putting the nutrients back in your pastures where you want them.
They'll stay by the hay.
They'll follow the hay. They will. It's the easiest way to move cows.
Can you use self-seeding annuals, or do you have to always put in the new seed yourself?
Ooh, great question, Mike. Caveat here, I am a part-time sales rep for a seed company in my spare time, so I shouldn't be telling you this. But I personally don't believe it really pays to plant seeds every year. In fact, for our situation, it doesn't pencil out.
Yeah.
So we try to plant our fields as minimal as possible to get the best forage and the best perennials to grow for as long as possible. But
definitely needed for someone who has like our type of field, like row crop, no life, no grass already.
Exactly. Yeah. So for you, you're going to have to plant. Like you can't just, whatever's growing underneath isn't going to be enough forage for you.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to plant into it, but you can let it go and reseed itself naturally. It takes a lot of self-control.
Yeah.
And it takes the ability to not see the full potential in year one to see the benefit pay off later on. And I see so many parallels with good farming and good soil management practices, as well as like personal care and like how do you look after yourself. And it's just like, so the investment you have to make is giving up the first year of grazing or second year grazing so that the annuals will seed out or perennials will seed out. And it's going to do wonders for the following years, but you're going to sacrifice that yield.
Yeah, you have to balance like feeding your animals versus nurturing your land and allowing those seeds to establish and grow.
Exactly.
But someone did Robert brought up a good point. The hay can be like seeding, baby.
Yeah,
the hay can do some seeding.
Good point, Robert. And that's one thing I didn't say. The benefit of hail grazing or bale bombing is that it naturally puts the seeds back on your fields, especially if it's a second or third cutting where you do have some of the seeds in there. And shout out to Dr. Roundtree from the Michigan State Extension Research Center, because he's told us that one hay bale, if you can spread it on your field and roll it out, the NPK fertilizer alone, so your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and your organic matter is worth anywhere from $30 to $40 a bale for a big round bale, maybe $50. So by that math, like you're almost net equal by buying the hay and rolling it on your fields as you would be if you were a conventional farmer
and spraying
and everything.
All those, okay. Another question from Desmoto. So you mentioned some farms use pesticides for hay production. What are the natural enemies of hay? So I think one thing that I didn't realize a few years ago is like many farms use fertilizer to grow hay.
I would say 9 out of 10, if not 99%, would
99%,
use, especially if they're just hay producers. That's what they do every year.
Yeah. But so I think it's important to ask them like what else they use. Like for example, pesticides. What I guess you guys haven't made hay in a while, but
we still make our own hay. We do make hay.
Yeah.
So we've transitioned from like 80% of our pastures, or 80% of our field were just row crops and hay, and 20% are pastures. And we flipped it where we have just about everything is fenced in now. We've got water lines throughout. And so generally what we'll do is if it's a really good, like in the spring, you get a lot of growth. So you could take a cutting of hay from a lot of different fields and still have enough hay forage growing up in the spring to graze the rest of the year.
Yeah.
So we'll generally do that. We'll take one cutting of hay in the spring from some of our best fields.
Yeah.
And then it's all fenced in so we can continue to graze after that. But that cutting of hay isn't enough for all of our animals. So we still have to buy from our partner farms that we trust and appreciate their practices.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's something that I didn't consider. I just thought that like all hay was natural. But if you have these like hay producers, they want a high demand so they can sell as much hay as possible. And so they almost have to rely on fertilizer to get as much yield as they can. But that's something that, like, if you go for the highest hay cost, that's again going to increase your costs of raising grass-fed animals. And organic hay is what, 2 times the cost of normal hay?
Yeah, most certified organic feeds would be about twice as much.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know anything about cloning animals?
No, nothing on cloning animals. We've done some, what's called artificial insemination.
AI,
and that's a way where you can bring in genetics to your herd or to your animals without having a male bull, or what's the lamb equivalent or the ewe equivalent? Ram, excuse me. So, and they do a lot in most confinement operations, whether it's a dairy or pork, like they pretty much artificially inseminate all their animals, and they don't worry about having to take care of a bull or a ram separately.
Yeah. You guys have a bull now, Little George?
We do. We have a bull. I think most would say you should have, if you're a cow-calf operation, really one bull can service 30 to 40 cows.
Service.
20 to 40
Thank you
cows.
for your service, Little George.
Service. But then you still have to feed the bull year round too, and you gotta look after it. And we have our separate bull pen where we look at, because we used to have 2 or 3 different bulls.
Yeah.
And so then you got to worry about our calving window too. Most people don't want to have calves year round. So you want to make sure you're calving at a certain time throughout the year.
Yeah.
And then once they're done calving, then you have to still take care of them. So a lot of times it can be just like renting is the best practice going forward. Like when you're first starting your farm, if you're first starting a livestock operation, I would strongly suggest trying to buy, if you're going to start having calves or lambs, have them already bred, so you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Or like we talked about, starting off with just the finishing part and not even worrying about having to worry about calving or lambing. Yeah,
so like, and taking it to chickens for egg layers, buy pullets ready to lay rather than chicks, so that you don't have to set up like a brooder.
Yeah, it's another
so like
set up an infrastructure.
Set yourself up for success and minimize your amount of like animals dying off, because your first year experienced farmers and raising animals from a young age is challenging. It costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of insecurity, especially year 1. Okay.
Yeah, and the biggest thing I can tell Ash and Sarah, the best thing we ever did was create a mistakes and lessons list.
Yeah.
And this is true of every business I've been a part of, every startup, and especially true in farming. And we've been doing it. My family's been raising animals for 100 years. And I tell you, every week we make more mistakes.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing that we do is try to learn from those mistakes and then see how can we control what we can control and make sure that these don't happen again in the future.
Mistakes and lesson lists. Stacey and I need to start a big wall and leave room for a lot of things, because it's going to happen.
I have a question from Kirsten.
Okay.
Do you guys plan to eventually produce hay on your fields or buy from local farmers who are mainly haymakers?
So year 1, year 2, with 22 acres, there's no way that you can have enough grass for your lambs to graze on and then also be able to cut hay, because you have to balance. Like if you cut hay, then your lambs won't have enough grass to graze. And so we will definitely be relying on local farmer sources for our hay until, if we expand and get a lot more acres, that we can like primarily use those for hay 1 year and like switch like hay and grazing operations. And so I think that that's something I didn't consider before, is you want to be able to leave the best foliage for your animals so they can fatten up and get the most amount of nutrients, rather than cutting those off. And then maybe your animals won't grow as much in the winter months, and that's the time where you should grow the most. So we'll be buying.
Yeah. One other point to add to that too, because I completely agree with everything you said.
Yeah.
The other big hurdle for making your own hay and producing your own crops for your livestock is farm equipment and implements are super expensive.
Yeah.
And if you pencil out like what it would cost for just to make your own hay, in terms of a mower, a rake, a baler, whether it's square baler or round baler,
yeah,
not even including your tractor, like that's anywhere from 30 to 60 grand up to 100 grand for used, not even new equipment, used equipment.
Yeah.
And then your tractor can like be another 20 to 40 grand easily, if not more. So you got to make a lot of hay and have a lot of fields and pastures to justify those costs.
Yeah.
And then we also, my parents have been making hay for many, many years. So we've accumulated the equipment over time. And we also have a wrapper, which wraps our hay with insulated wrap to keep it preserved. It's called haylage. So especially in the winter, we have 6 months in the winter. And so that's another cost if you wanted to do that.
That's true.
So you're farther ahead. It's going to cost more to buy it from others, farms that you trust. But when you have the right mindset of how you can use the hay to benefit your fields and the manure and fertilizer, it's probably the best investment you can make long term. But it's huge. It's a big capital investment up front.
I guess that's something I didn't talk about earlier for like the seeding and fertilizer. You have to have heavy machinery to be able to seed, and we're going to be doing no-till seeding on our fields, and that would cost way too much to be able to buy the equipment to do no-till seeding and spray fertilizer. So we will be renting that equipment from a local farm. And so especially for the first couple of years, investing in those heavy machinery, when you're only going to be using it 1 or 2 times a year, it makes more sense to rent it for like a day rather than purchasing used equipment. That was something. Okay.
Right. Because then you also have to store it if you buy the equipment.
Storage. So. True. All right. We're getting close to closing because Cowboy Kyle's got to leave soon. But how about spraying manure on the fields to jumpstart everything? That is a great question. And that is something that we're interested in doing here. That's why we have our little flock of egg layers. Little bit more egg layers. Yeah. We'll be expanding that soon, hopefully. But he taught me that trying to get the most amount of diverse manure, so as much poo from a different livestock as you can, because they each provide unique nutrients. And so we were trying to get as much chicken manure as we can. And then our neighbor actually has like a big pile of horse poo because she has a small plot of land. And so she's just been collecting her poo in a spot. And so she's actually going to let us spray that out into the fields. And I think that that's a really good way to jumpstart biology in the soil. And so that's going to be our goal sometime between now and like springtime would be to get a lot of more chicken poo and horse poo onto the fields. But that's another cost. Our methods, we're doing it without buying or paying for anything. How much would you think it would cost to get, for example, like pig poo or chicken manure on like a 20-acre plot?
Oh, I don't know. It depends. So the best practice, most organic operations, if they're putting that in their field, they're buying it from a big poultry house or a big hog barn. And so it'd be called poultry litter is the best thing to buy. And so that's what we put on for our fields because we try to do everything as organic as possible. So chicken turkey litter has so much nitrogen and beneficial nutrients. Yeah. So we'll get those trucked in, and there's a really big poultry place in Grand Rapids area that will truck it up to us an hour away. And
pack their horse poo up.
Yeah, it smells awful, but chicken poo. And then they'll dump that there, and then we'll spread that in the fields, usually in the spring, right before planting or right after we want this grass to start growing.
Because that's just straight natural fertilizer.
Straight natural fertilizer.
Isn't that technically what organic fertilizer is? It's like animal manure.
I think so. Don't quote me on that.
Okay. Maybe some other like natural like plant things, but okay. Mike had a really good idea. Maybe do a lessons learned interview series from other farmers. I like that idea a lot, Mike, because I know that I can learn from his experiences. Sarah and I are going to be failing so much in these next few years. And I think that having those, what did you call your wall?
Mistakes and lessons.
Mistakes and lessons wall that we could almost share from other farmers. That would be really valuable to share. So good idea, Mike. Okay, we're heading right into 45 minutes. We were planning on doing 30, and we didn't even get into some other topics. We'll just have to do another live. So this live was focused on startup costs and like some considerations for new regenerative farmers.
You guys should like this video if you want to see more of Cowboy Kyle.
That's probably the last one.
Nope.
No, he'll be back.
Here, he'll be back.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks so much.
Behave like an angel. Okay.